Hi, welcome to Ancient School. This is Jason Martell. I want to personally thank you for becoming a member, and hopefully over the next few months, you'll really enjoy the lessons that you'll be receiving from Ancient School. We're going to be talking about various topics from esoteric ancient knowledge and really diving into the ancient astronaut theory. So I hope you enjoy this first lesson as we dive into where do we come from. Okay, let's go ahead and get this lesson started. So it's very interesting to look at the overall ecology of life and how it could have started here on Earth. Now, there's obviously a lot of controversy in the time frame for life to have started here on Earth, and there's been, analogies put out there that if we were able to assemble our whole genetic code into making actual life, that it's something like a tornado going through a junkyard and correctly assembling a 747. The odds are very slim that even in 4.7 billion years that life's been around, that life actually somehow evolved naturally from a lightning bolt hitting some primordial soup and mixing amino acids together in some complex way to form life. So I want to make it very clear that the answer of where does life begin or how does life start is obviously very complex. So what I'm going to do is kind of caveat more into talking about us as a human species and kind of where we come into the mix. But let's explore a little bit of the astrobiological information because it is interesting. Now, most people are familiar with the term the Big Bang Theory. It's not just a popular TV show, which is an awesome show. The Big Bang Theory basically illustrates that, uh, at some point in our past, 4.7 billion years ago, a Big Bang occurred, and science has been pushing out the idea that, due to this infinitesimal time of when this took place, based on now, that through evolution and such, that we can see a linear time scale that puts us where we're at. Um, this is obviously known as the Big Bang Theory. And, we put it again where we say a point in time when time actually took place based on this large explosion. And then from there, we try and pinpoint out where we are even to this day. So obviously this is a very esoteric topic, but it's obviously very difficult to even explain just talking about human beings. So that's really the focus of where I'd like to dive into. But it is interesting to note that some of the latest theories about how does life start on Earth, or how is it that evolution is taking place, is through panspermia. Science is starting to recognize that it's probably unlikely that in 4.7 billion years we were, able to actually evolve from amino acids in a primordial soup to us today. It's very unlikely. So it's more than likely that Earth was seeded with life. And now one of the ideas out there is called panspermia, that life is basically already in space, whole and complete, in the form of traveling on comets. We've seen advanced amino acids and buckyballs and things that they found in debris that they found out there, which suggests the building blocks of life are found in space. Life's probably also in space. But more interesting is a more honed version of this panspermia theory. It's called directed panspermia. And that's basically via an extraterrestrial intelligence. So the scientific community actually putting out the idea that, well, let's put the idea of panspermia one step ahead, because it's not just by chance that these particles of life and such arrive here on Earth. Maybe they're directed here, directed panspermia. So I really think that is a very interesting idea. And again, it's something that we're definitely exploring through NASA's current astrobiological programs, which is also a very interesting thing that people should be aware of and pay attention to. Now, a lot of the topics in ufology or the paranormal field, even with the show Ancient Aliens, rely on scientific explanations and scientific resources. So a lot of the things that you can rely on when looking at paranormal or things that we can't quite identify, like life in space, is to look at some of the things that NASA is pursuing in some of their, space-based astrobiological missions. And you can just Google NASA astrobiology and you'll find a plethora of information. One of the missions that they've been proposing is, to send a probe to one of the moons of Jupiter called Europa, which they have, through imaging, have seen, it looks like it has a very advanced ice sheet that covers the whole surface of the planet. The whole planet is enveloped in this like sluggish type of ice that's constantly moving around. So if they were to penetrate this ice sheet, they theorize there's like a 40-mile deep ocean under Europa. And other moons of Jupiter, Callisto and Ganymede, we know for sure that there are signs of heat, extensive volcanic activity on some of the moons of Jupiter. So on Europa, if we have an ocean, well, we can look for signs like we see here on Earth, meaning when we breach the deep areas of our oceans where there's no sunlight, we find these thermal vents. And sure enough, there's all kinds of crabs and shrimp and life thriving off the energy just being emitted from the thermal vent. No sunlight whatsoever. So the same principles could be taking place on other areas in our solar system, specifically Europa, Jupiter's moon. If we were to pierce this ice sheet and go down to its thermal vents, again, we might find actual extraterrestrial life. It's really that simple. Unfortunately, NASA has protocols and things that they have to abide by where, they can't just build an instrument that's going to go scoop up an extraterrestrial, even if it's a bug. These are very advanced protocols where they're still looking for the signs of life. Some engineer at NASA has spent 16 years to build an instrument that might pierce the surface of an extraterrestrial moon, and it will look for minerals and signs to corroborate, that there's an actual presence of life. But again, our sciences still need to catch up much more for us to actually have the tools to confirm life. All the evidence is pointing in that direction. So as we continue to, explore comets and asteroids and things through these astrobiological missions that we're going to be sending, various comets and probes. We recently looked at a comet called Wild 2 and caught some of the debris and things that were there. And again, we found DNA and amino acids and complex building blocks for life. So some very interesting things, again, that can be found by looking at some of the NASA missions. Okay, so now we get into obviously more along the lines of human evolution. And again, I'm kind of jumping forward here, but really these topics are of most interest in trying to understand kind of the human perspective as to how is it that somehow we're here on Earth as human beings, because the Darwinistic evolution really doesn't add up. There is something called the missing link. Now, when we look at the bone records of the various types of species we have up until us, we have Neanderthal man and Australopithecine and various descriptions of these very large skulled, very different looking than our current humans. And so it really does bring into question a lot of things that have not been properly answered by looking at the human evolution on just a Darwinistic perspective, that somehow we were very simple and now we've become ever so complex. Well, if that's the case, then there's definitely a missing link, because there is a huge difference between the Neanderthal man that was very large in stature and covered in fur and pretty much could survive in the jungle fine. But if you look at the current human being, if you were to put us in the jungle, we would be scratched by branches and get sunburned. So we really aren't made to be just living in the nature without clothing and such as natural life forms that we see here. So this really does raise the question as to how we were able to become, into an existence at all, essentially. And so this is where we really have to start to rely on some of the more trickier areas, because unfortunately our history has always been divided up to this point between science and religion. You can either take the scientific perspective and look for evidence through the Darwinistic view and various now genetic and biological reasons, looking at our DNA and such, or you can take the religious approach and just understand that this is all too good to be true. Life is not a coincidence. We must have faith, right, that there is a larger presence. I would sometimes even give the analogy that, I have pets, animals that I take care of and love, and they must look at me as their owner as somewhat godlike in that I provide food for them and I take care of them and I give them endless love and protection. Well, human beings seem to have lost that connection with a higher life form. Not that we're pets to a higher life form, but as that analogy states, we have no other higher beings to look up to. It seems all the ancient cultures recognized that they do exist and actually had a connection with them. There were once giants upon the earth, as the Christian Bible says. So let's explore those topics of where we come from, because that is very fascinating information. Now, when we look at the most ancient records that we currently have on the books, not talking about fragments of civilizations like Göbekli Tepe or Rapa Nui on Easter Island, these are all obviously pieces of a much larger puzzle, which we'll explore over the months here at Ancient School. But just looking at the topic of where do we come from, there's obviously on the books now a culture known as Sumer. And that's pretty much where we would call today's southern day Iraq. So as it stands now, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this fertile strip of land, once called Mesopotamia, Babylon, also originally called Sumer at about 3800 BC, literally right out of the Stone Age, Sumerian civilization pops up and has over 100 of the firsts needed for a high civilization. Now, we're talking about a system of writing called cuneiform script. And what's interesting about the Sumerian culture is that, again, a lot of the advanced systems that they just sprung up right out of the Stone Age, we're still using today. So let's kind of explore some of these topics. You can see here various tablets and systems of pictograms that they used. They also used this very commonly, which was a cylinder seal. It was a very interesting way of reverse carving information on a precious stone so that when you would roll it over wet clay, you could leave the positive imprint. They would then take these clay tablets and stick them in a kiln, a primitive stove, and would then bake them from clay into stone. So literally keying that phrase, writing in stone. They had very advanced mathematics. Again, coming right out of the Stone Age, they used a system based on the number 6 and the number 10. It's called sexagesimal. And with this, they were able to do very advanced geometry. These are examples of land plots where to divide between the nieces and nephews and brothers who gets the proper portion of land. They used very advanced land proportions based on, again, a system of mathematics. Now, their system of mathematics, again, was allowed them to calculate very large numbers as well as very small numbers. The large numbers, for instance, were very interesting. The orbits of planets. They gave an orbit of a certain planet called Nibiru, which we'll discuss in later sessions here at Ancient School. But this one specific planet they called Nibiru, and they said that it took 3,600 years to orbit our sun. They actually truncated that number to 360 degrees and creating the first degrees of the circle. They called that a shar, a completed circle or an orbit. Now, some of the things that they still used based on this math system and time, 12 hours in a day, 12 months in a year, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, even the division of the heavens into 12 constellations seems to have been very strongly used within the Sumerian culture. Now we have to take our hats off to one of the main scholars that brought forth the Sumerian information outside of the main academic views. Not to discredit main academic views on ancient history, but there unfortunately is a line drawn in the sand that says extraterrestrials don't exist, we've never been visited by them, and no one's willing to cross that. Well, not no one, but only a select handful have done so, and only a select few have done so in an esoteric way. Zachariah Sitchin was 93, he passed away a few years ago, and spent 50 years, 50 years, accumulating a series of books called the Earth Chronicles, where he started off, because he was raised in Palestine, could read ancient Hebrew, he started off looking at the Sumerian culture and the cuneiform script, and was literally one of a handful of about 250 people in the world that can actually read direct cuneiform script. So when he was translating these scripts, Zechariah took kind of a different approach than main academic scholars. Most linguists would look at a phrase or a word, Nibiru, Anunnaki, Nephilim, and would try and put it into a context around the information that it was woven around. Now, Zachariah Sitchin was one of the few who was able to distill this information with all of the stories connecting to each other, a bigger global view or understanding of the overall history and information being told. Some cultures had pieces of it, no one had the full tale. So that's why we have various versions of the Bible in the Hebrew version or the New King James Version in English. Well, we also have Sumerian tablets written in stone before any of these books as the original sources of many of these biblical tales. So what you'll find in the research of Zachariah Sitchin is that he started with the base cuneiform script of Sumer and found that other cultures from Akkadian, Iraq, Iran, even on other continents in Mesoamerica and South America, China, seemed to be grasping a similar type of building style and technology and understanding of a power of flight from the gods. So very interesting information that you should definitely look into, Zachariah Sitchin. I'd start with the 12th planet. Now, the system of writing used by the Sumerians, this cuneiform script, was usually done on precious stones, like you see here, and they used a system of writing to create these intricate symbols. They used something called a stylus. It kind of looked like a screwdriver, and they would turn it and twist it in the wet clay, usually, or sometimes, as I mentioned here, on precious stone, depending on what they were writing about. But they also recorded pictograms and again had these cylinder seals, which I'll show you in a few minutes here. But very intricate detail. We can see literally symbols of the constellation and astronomical information bequeathed on this stone. They also had the representation of this winged disk and its crescent moon, the symbol of the home world of where their gods, the Anunnaki, came from. Now, this is heavy information. There was once a time when there were giants upon the earth. All of the ancient cultures, not just Christianity, speak of a time when they were connected with the beings that came from the stars, their gods. The Sumerians, again, are very interesting because they depict astronomical information and list data about these planets of where the gods come from and how they got here. Now, this one again is just showing a scene representation of the winged disk and its crescent moon, and possibly an Anunnaki speaking to a Sumerian king. But what's interesting is that there's thousands of these Sumerian cuneiform tablets, and it's kind of like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, at the last scene where they're wheeling the Ark away into this grand warehouse full of boxes. Well, the Louvre Museum and various other sites around the world have these Sumerian tablets untranslated, just sitting in their cellar. And I'm really trying to gather access to, at first, the Louvre, to at least uncover with our own set of linguists and look at some of this information. Some of the tablets that we've been able to look at show that they've been tracking movements of the stars for thousands of years in some cases. It's sacred information. They literally speak of how a priest would sit with a scribe, someone who actually had the ability at the time to write and read the cuneiform script. A priest would work with a scribe who had that skill, and they would directly sit with an Anunnaki, an ancient god, and have this information written into stone. Some of the information they wrote about was originally captured around how they came here, the path that they took, certain stars that they asked them to watch as signs of their return. So they literally have these high priests who've maintained sacred astronomical information, again, over thousands of years, passing it only amongst the high priests about patterns that they're watching for. And this sacred astronomy isn't just in Sumer. Obviously, I'm just touching on this because this is lesson 1 of ancient school. But as you're going to see, many of the ancient cultures, especially in Egypt, had a lost sacred knowledge of astronomy. The Sumerians went to great efforts to record this sacred information and tracked these movements on clay tablets that they again stored and we still have access to today. Again, they talk about the observations of various planets within our solar system and watching over year by year and making mathematical calculations on their movements And again, this was for a reason, more than likely to track on a grand scale of time, the lost cycle of time, to actually know when the gods will return. Pretty heavy stuff. Now, again, I'm not just making this up, folks. This is an actual cylinder tablet that, what's really interesting about this is just simply the shape. They were like, ancients weren't familiar with the shape of an ellipse. That's why they had no wheeled wagons or carts. Well, unfortunately, that's just not true, because here's an actually a Sumerian tablet which was in the shape of a cylinder. Now, what's really interesting about this information, unfortunately, it was badly damaged, so we don't have these parts. But the parts that we do have really say some amazing information to be coming out of a culture from 3800 BC. Let's zoom into this area right here. What we have here is translated by Zachariah Sitchin, and it explains how the course corrections the Anunnaki would need to take to actually arrive to planet Earth. And you can see that some of the words along the edge here talk about rocket, rocket, pile up, mountain, high, high, high. What are they talking about? Some kind of a launching pad or a landing platform? And you can see how it talks about the path that Enlil had to take, which planets he literally had to pass by getting from their mountainous planet of Nibiru and passing by how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 before they reached Earth. Now, what's interesting about that is we always think that we're the third rock from the sun. Well, if you count from Pluto traveling inward to our solar system, Earth is the 7th planet, the sacred number 7, 7 days in a week, passing by 7 planets to arrive here. Now, again, folks, very interesting information coming out of the Sumerian culture. So this really starts to raise a question, right, of looking at not only Sumer, but various other cultures that speak of this interaction of when their gods were here and they interacted with them. They didn't understand the technology where they were saying, so they said they were on a chariot of fire or taken up by a whirlwind. A lot of these depictions of angels and beings that we have, sometimes depicted with a halo or having this glow, it's a very interesting similarity to the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki. Now, they come from a planet they called Nibiru, and Nibiru meant planet of the crossing, and it was symbolized by a glowing cross in the sky. This is thousands of years before Christ being on a cross. Nibiru was a glowing planet. The Anunnaki were known to have literally a glow about them. Some of these depictions that we have of angels with wings and the glow, well, it turns out that might not be too far off base. Many of the Sumerian depictions of these beings, the Anunnaki, are always depicted with wings or flying in this symbol called the winged disc, and are talked about having a glow about them. If you were standing in front of an Anunnaki, you would literally notice a glow about them. Very interesting information paralleling the Christian understandings of these angelic beings. I think they're one and the same. Now, we see this scene over and over when talking about the Sumerian information. Usually it's a king, a Sumerian king, held up on a platform or situated on a mountaintop higher than the people. Usually the people are holding up the platform to make this interaction take place, where the king is receiving sacred information from a god, an Anunnaki coming down on a winged disc. You can see that he's even stacked up on these steps here, what appear to be a platform. Now, some people have even pointed out, like researcher William Henry, which hopefully will be joining us with future lessons to you here at Ancient School, an appearance of a doorway, some type of a gateway, possibly a stargate. Is this possibly a stargate releasing the Anunnaki to come to the king here on Earth? Again, this is speculation. But we see this scene depicted all over ancient Sumer, in Iraq and in Iran. The same wall, the same scene carved out of mountainsides. Now, if this is mythology, folks, why would they spend years carving out a mountainside to show this momentous event? This is not mythology. They are doing their best to describe things that they saw taking place with the tools and understandings of their time. Nothing else had the power of flight in 3800 BC aside from birds. That's the only way they can depict what they saw as the power of flight. This power of flight, though, is always represented as a winged disc, a flying disc. Where have we seen that or heard that before? Again, we look to this scene and see that it's repeated over and over. The symbol of the winged disc, the god coming down on the winged disc, the king being held up on a platform by the people to make this interaction happen. There's something being told here over and over of great importance. So we have to realize that this symbology is not just shown in Sumer, it's echoed into other cultures like the sun god Ra in Egypt and Isis. Various other gods in other continents are depicted with the ability of flight. One of the main gods in Sumerian times, her name was Ishtar, and there was a story that she used to like to fly over the skies of Earth. Now, she would choose certain men to come into her sky abode, and unfortunately, while Ishtar was extremely beautiful, none of the men were ever returned. There's actually a story of a great king, Gilgamesh, who Ishtar invited her into her sky abode, and he said, "Well, you are beautiful, but no thank you," because it seems none of the men ever seemed to return. But look at the great detail they did in trying to describe Ishtar, this metal artifact, again, thousands of years old, and look at the detail with screws even in the hands. Unbelievable detail and design from such a primitive, what we assume a primitive culture. Now, some of the symbology that they show, again, really raises a lot of questions. The overall symbol of an Anunnaki, which is again the Sumerian god, this term Anunnaki simply meant those who from heaven come to earth. They're usually depicted with a bird-like suit and wings. This is a commander of a spaceport. When we see this symbology with utilizing bird characteristics, it usually has something to do with the power of flight. A symbolic reference, though, I'll explain in a minute. Some other pieces here are very interesting. Not only can you see that they're very muscular, genetically in design, but they're holding up interesting symbolic references. The fruit of life, acorn here, or this pine cone, which is also a symbol of the pineal gland and this lost nervous system that we don't access anymore, the pineal gland. Whole other topic we'll have to get into in another lesson. Here holding the water of life, like a basket containing the water of life, and possibly wearing a wristwatch. Again, some of the pieces and things that you see depicted, we have to understand that they didn't they didn't understand technology, but with our understandings of technology, we can definitely see things that they've displayed to us and put it into the context of what they were trying to communicate. So again, the references to the power of flight, well, we should be familiar with the first landing on the moon and this famous saying by Neil Armstrong, because this is again a symbolic reference.
4 forward, drift into the right level. 30 seconds forward, drift. We copy you down, Eagle. The Eagle has landed.
The Eagle has landed. Now, again, we have to understand that we're talking about symbolic references here. 6,000 years from now, they're not going to look at the symbol of the Apollo 11 patch, our first, journey to the moon, and go, well, what were they doing? They put a bird on the moon? Of course not. They realized we're showing a symbolic reference that we had the power of flight, just like the Sumerians were doing in showing that the Anunnaki are depicted with wings. Okay, so that really does put things into context when we start to realize the symbolic references being shown over and over again from ancient times. Ancient man was seeing what they appeared to be human-like beings, very clearly being depicted, human-like beings flying some type of a craft. And in this case, they're showing a disc with wings, a flying disc. I would interpret this as a man in a flying disc came down. Sounds just like a UFO. Now, what's interesting about a lot of the tablets and cylinder seals that we have are the way that they've left us this information. We have the actual cylinder seals, which is a way to press out the positive imprint and create these pictograms. And we also have a lot of actual texts that accompany these seals that describe or give context to the scenery. And again, what are we seeing here? Some type of winged disc and some representation possibly of DNA or the tree of life. This is a scene shown over and over as the gods are coming down near the tree of life. It must mean something. Now, this is why we need to really get into some of these places in the Louvre Museum and find these tablets and artifacts that are yet still to be translated. Here again, we see some type of interesting scene where it appears to be a female god with wings and a priest or a couple of priests, and they're pouring water or receiving some type of knowledge. Very interesting symbology shown. And the intricacy and detail that they put together is really quite amazing. The color and intricacy that they go to, the length to make this artwork, you can see that these are all individual bricks being stacked into a wall. So again, just very intricate design. So over and over, we have these references of the Sumerian gods coming to Earth, and we have to realize that while this looks very similar to a Christian angel, this is kind of like the chicken or the egg syndrome. These are thousands of years before the Hebrew or Christian Bible, and they show a very similar depiction of what appears to be an angel or a god coming down, always depicted in this winged disc. It must be that the ancients were trying to say they were coming down in a flying disc. Now, we have very interesting pieces of the Sumerian information that really cross over now into the religious side of the information for confirmation, not just science. In the Bible, there talks about a time when there were 7 days of creation, where man created the earth and the man and animals and plants. Well, in that truncated version of 7 days of creation in the English Bible, if we go back thousands of years before that, in the Sumerian version, we actually have 7 stone tablets of creation. A much more elongated story in a set of tablets called the Enuma Elish. And again, this information gets into a very detailed explanation for how our planets are created, how Earth comes into existence, human beings come into existence. So it's a very interesting tale that we'll definitely explore over various lessons here at Ancient School. Now again, these depictions of the Anunnaki are very interesting, being depicted as these tall beings. Um, After the Great Flood, there were giants upon the earth. Well, these are again truncated stories from the Sumerian tales, which seem to have actually been when they were living in this time. And the Bible is talking about this ancient history. We can explore this information directly and learn what the Sumerians were taught by the Anunnaki and possibly when they were told that they'll return. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed the lesson this week. What I'd like you to do is make sure that you study some of the artifacts that we have available for you to look at here. I've gone ahead and put these online in the form of a collection of artifacts that you can look at. I believe I can just choose my cursor here and click this link. Basically, you would just want to go online, and when you have a chance, view this link here. Here we go. And you'll see that I was lucky enough to hire a professional antiquities photographer, and so that many of the seals that you've seen in today's lecture are actually here online. And you can go through and see a lot of these seals and read about the information that they talk about. And again, I've tried to choose specifically astronomical information or things having to do with the Anunnaki, just because there's thousands of these tablets. And, I'll just take you through a couple here. But as you can see, lots of information are relating to astronomical data, things that they talked about when they were living at that time, many depictions of these Anunnaki and the intricacy and the detail of how they laid out these depictions really does merit further exploration. You can see some of the original images from when they were doing the excavations in the early 1900s. Some of these tablets, again, they really do raise a lot of questions. And some of the most infamous ones, like the flood tablet, are literally on display, in these various museums. So I would definitely recommend that you take a look at some of this information, because you know we have to realize that the flood tablet and these various things, they actually are in existence. They're not just talked about in the Bible. The tablets and information still actually exist. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end it there, and stay tuned for next week's lesson from Ancient School.